The Alternative Corner, where we will follow topics of interest other than boxing. At October Red, we always want to engage with our listeners and accommodate what our viewers want to listen to. Feedback is essential. Feel free to tell us yours. Enjoy episode 14, where we discuss paragraph 383 to 430 of the completed libel case from claimant British writer, director and actor Noel Clarke versus The Guardian.
Hello, good afternoon. It's probably still morning actually. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are. It's Abs and I'm back once again, and this time it is the Alternative Corner. I feel like I've neglected my corner a little bit actually. Been a bit tangled in other stuff. Obviously boxing's heated back up and I just haven't had the time. But we're going to move back onto the case that we started the Alternative Corner off with, and that is the case, the libel case, which is completed. We are just going through what was said at the case with Noel Clarke versus The Guardian. I think we got up to potentially 382, 383 paragraph. So we're going to carry on from there. And the point of this is to get a balanced view. I've already spotted a lot of biases, which I've mentioned during these, what you could say is listenings. It's not a video, is it? Because there has to be balance in everything, and even within the justice there is some bias, and I have pointed that out. Not saying that Noel Clarke is by any way innocent of what the women have accused him of doing, but I believe sometimes and at some points things have been slightly unfair to him because the evidence is stacked against him. But without further ado, we're gonna, I think I've named this episode The Turning Point, and that's because it's inside the evidence that broke Clarke's defence. So by this stage of the trial, the tone had definitely changed. The court had heard from friends, colleagues and critiques. But in paragraphs of 383 to 430 is what we're going to cover today, the picture starts to become more clear and more damaging. It was a turning point where the judge began to form a definitive view, not about one isolated incident, but about a pattern of behaviour and a man, Noel Clarke, trying to explain it away. This is what happens when there are patterns. You judge people on patterns of behaviour. We all do it, don't we? Once we see a certain pattern evolving from someone, we can almost predict what they're going to do next. Or if somebody tells us a story that matches that pattern, we almost agree without questioning it. An easy way, some would say, that evidence can be padded against you because it matches what you're known to do. It doesn't always necessarily mean that it's true. But we're going into another witness here, and it's witness Celia. So a camera assistant who had worked with Clarke on one of his film projects. She described how on set he often crossed personal boundaries, making sexual jokes, hugging female staff too tightly and commenting on their bodies in ways that made them uncomfortable. Now, I'm quite a huggy person, and I'd be absolutely mortified if somebody took me, giving them a squeeze, a tight squeeze, that they thought there was anything more than just me being friendly. However, these days you've got to be really mindful about personal space, and just because you find something okay, you find it natural, it's something that you do, doesn't mean the person that you're presenting that to or doing that to will feel the same. It's not the 1980s, ladies and gentlemen, where people got away with a lot more and complained a lot less. It's 2025 now, and people do have barriers. And that's a good thing. I'm not saying that it isn't. But I'm saying that you have to be mindful that what's acceptable to you isn't necessarily acceptable to others. But back to Celia, who clearly wasn't accusing him of any crime. She made that clear. But she said there was a culture of silence because Clarke was the boss. She was cross-examined. She stayed calm. And she said, I didn't want this. I just wanted to tell the truth about what I saw and how it made me feel. Clarke's team in turn tried to paint her as part of a post #MeToo backlash. Someone interpreting the workplace banter as harassment, but the judge didn't see it that way. Steen called her evidence measured, consistent and reflective of experiences described by multiple witnesses. Celia came across not as bitter, but as believable. Now, workplace banter, harassment, like I said, there's things that have gone on in the workplace that you wouldn't dare dream of doing that in this day and age. Things that were deemed as acceptable are definitely not acceptable now. And it's about understanding those boundaries, understanding that once was a almost culture-like in the UK. I can speak for the UK because that's where I'm from. Back in the days of Carry On, Benny Hill, member of those, kind of flirtatious sexual banter comedies that we'd watch and deem it as normal, and it was okay in the workplace to behave like that. It's just not acceptable now. You just can't do that. So the impact Cecilia's testimony helped build a pattern of conduct that the Guardian needed to prove in its truth defence. In other words, like I said, they had to prove what they were doing was because it was the truth and they wanted to protect others. That's their defence of Clarke trying to sue them. We had another witness, Gemma, a young actress who had met Clarke during auditions and later at a rap party. She alleged that Clarke tried to kiss her without consent and later sent inappropriate messages. Clarke denied all of it and said it was friendly, playful and misinterpreted. But Gemma's story was specific. She remembered the setting, the lighting, the words he used. She said the incident left her embarrassed and confused, and that when she later read the Guardian investigation, she realised she wasn't alone. In court, the judge watched them both very closely. She noticed that Clarke's denials were unconvincing in tone, and that his portrayal of events as harmless banter sounded rehearsed and defensive. The impact from Gemma's evidence, it became one of the most persuasive of personal accounts given, especially when viewed alongside others describing the similar behaviour. I'm going to get that bit up so I can just read it in context. So you can have a full view. I'll give you like an example. So 392, it was apparent during the short time that Miss Caldwell was in the witness box that she found the experience of giving evidence nerve-wracking and upsetting. Nevertheless, she sought to assist the court by giving an honest account. She said that Mr. Clarke opened the session and told us that it was all about challenging ourselves and pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone, and suggested that to do that we push ourselves and improvise a scene that involved getting ready for bed, and it was kind of up to us how far we took that. So it was not, he didn't tell us that we had to get undressed or get totally naked, but it was implied that if we pushed ourselves and went as far as we could, then we, in a real life situation that we would be seen more favourably against other auditionees if we took it further. And he kind of said, well, you don't have to, it's up to you. You do not have to do it, but if someone else is going to come in and do it, then they would get the part, sort of thing. She stood by her written evidence that Mr. Clarke suggested undressing or being naked, but made clear we were not forced to do anything. Mr. Clarke's evidence was the purpose of this class was to encourage students to face their fears and become more comfortable. He explained to the students that some scenes would require feeling uncomfortable. As an example, he suggested that the students improvise getting ready for bed. Mr. Clarke said that they were free to interpret those instructions as they wished. He said, I didn't encourage or pressure any student to remove any item of clothing. Mr. Clarke recalled the class, but didn't remember Miss Caldwell or how she interpreted the exercise. In cross-examination, Mr. Clarke said the improvisation that was asked of them was an improvisation of where they get ready for bed. And within this improvisation, get my teeth back in, first of all, they were men and women, all adults. They could decide just how much they wanted to get ready for bed and how much they did not want to get ready for bed. I agree with the Guardian's submissions that Mr. Clarke was here using the words get ready for bed as a synonym for getting undressed. Mr. Clarke reiterated there was no encouragement to strip, and there was most certainly, unequivocally, no encouragement to get naked. There was no encouragement to take off clothes. But he did not dispute that he may have praised her and the other students who had gone the furthest in removing clothing for the improvisation. In both his written and oral evidence, Mr. Clarke denied that he asked the students to perform this improvisation for his own sexual gratification. He said there was no sort of dastardly kind of let me get what I can see here. There was absolutely none of that. The defendant draws attention to Mr. Clarke's solicitor's response to the allegation concerning LSDA provided to the Guardian prior to publication of the fourth article, which stated the class was called Facing Your Fears, and it was intended to address and help students with anxieties about acting roles. The students were all adults. Many of these students' fears related to being required to be partially dressed for roles. Part of the workshop was to normalise the removal of their outer clothing and make them feel that they could do so in a safe environment without being judged or analysed. However, our client categorically denies that's part of he encouraged or forced anyone to be naked. Now, call me what you like, but with somebody that has got a little bit of reputation for being sexually flirty, sexually inappropriate towards women on sets, that definitely doesn't bode well. It doesn't look good. The rumours were obviously out there at that time. And yes, I get it. There's acting classes, improvisation, however you want to translate what's being asked to do is down to you. It's a play on words, isn't it? But the end of it was the more uncomfortable you're prepared to get and show that, the likely you are to get the part. Rings a little bit of bells in the acting industry, doesn't it? So his defence that he's always relied on is banter. It's banter. And that goes to paragraph 403 to 410. And throughout his testimony, Clarke returned to one phrase. It was just banter. He admitted to being tactile, to making jokes that might have been inappropriate by today's standards, but insists they were never sexual, never malicious. He said the film industry is full of teasing, full of humour. If we can't take a joke, we can't create. He portrayed himself as a casualty of cultural change and someone misjudged by new norms. But the judge wasn't convinced. She said that this explanation reflected a pattern of minimisation and denial. It wasn't about changing culture. It was about a consistent disregard for boundaries. The banter defence, as it came to be known, failed completely. The defence theme ultimately weakened Clarke's credibility rather than protecting him. Now, devil's advocate, is that his truth? Changing culture, switching from what was deemed as normal before to not be deemed as normal now. I'll let you guys decide that in the comments. Like I said, I'm not condoning anything, but is there such thing as a cultural change in this, what you class as banter, to it being accepted, or in this case, not accepted as normal behaviour? Devil's advocate, quite often you'd get the canteen culture where there were potentially racist jokes made, jokes about black folk. You know, I've heard them all myself. Oh, it's just a bit of banter. What is wrong with you? It's just a joke. Does that make it acceptable? Does that make it right? Back in the day, we could have said all of this and no one would have cared. You will often see black people on the internet making racist jokes about themselves, and their white counterparts jumping in the comments saying, there it is, there it is, at least you can take a joke. It's funny, isn't it, when you're not on the receiving end? Clarke's inconsistencies, we touch on paragraph 411 to 420, and this is, we go into the details, the inconsistencies. Clarke was asked about messages, images, deleted files. His answer changed subtly over time. And this is one of the things with evidence. If you delete something, is there that subconscious knowledge that if that stays there, it's incriminating, it's dangerous? That's why we delete things, right? Because we don't want no one to see them. It's not like, oh, I've got a inbox full of emails that I don't need that are spam, I'm just going to delete them. This is something where you've consciously chosen to write something, to message something, to take a picture, to receive a picture, to send on a picture, something you know that you shouldn't have done. So there's an element of, when you look at the evidence as it is in black and white, what you've said, what you've sent, what you've received, what you've passed on, was it okay to do that? If so, why would you delete the messages? At one point, he denied saving intimate images. Later, he said he might have stored them for professional purposes. He was pressed on a deleted video clip and his account shifted from "I don't remember" to "it was irrelevant." Now, this is the problem when it comes to preparation for yourself. If you happen to find yourself in a situation, if you're telling the truth, you never have to remember it. You only have to remember telling a lie. And that's basically the facts. You pay for solicitors to cross-examine people because they've gone over the evidence. They've looked at holes. They've looked at things that they can potentially disprove in front of other people, that brings up doubts and ruins your credibility. I've gone to say, if he had literally gone through all of that evidence with a fine-tooth comb, he either would have prepared more diligently, or he basically would have thought, I can't take these to court because of look at all of the evidence that is here against me, and I can't rebut that properly. Because changing your story from saying I didn't save images and said, oh, if I did it, I've saved them for professional purposes. Then there was a deleted video clip and it said, I don't remember to, it was irrelevant. Well, the inconsistencies aren't going to help. So the judge on that has described him as an intelligent witness who tailored his answers to preserve his image. She said that his testimony was carefully curated, not spontaneous truth. Tailored his answers to preserve his image. At the end of the day, that's what he's there for, because that's what the case is about. He's trying to preserve his image. So in that defense, what is he supposed to do? He's obviously going to preserve his image, isn't he? But the fact is that he was inconsistent, and that doesn't help. The contradictions mattered. In a defamation trial, a witness doesn't need to be perfect, but they need to be consistent. And the fact is, he wasn't. So each inconsistency chipped away at his reliability, showing a man who adjusted facts to fit his narrative. And that's just the way that it is. That's just the way that it looks. Then the defence called in Clarke's supporters, because obviously he needs those as well. Paragraph 421 to 430. Colleagues, friends, people who had worked with him for years. They described him as professional, generous, and protective of those around him. One actor said, "Noel gave me my first break. He was never inappropriate with me or anyone I saw." Another producer testified, "He was demanding, yes, but not dangerous." The judge accepted that these witnesses were telling the truth about their own experiences. Well, obviously that's why they're there, because they're character witnesses, and that's what they're going to do, tell their truth about their experiences, because everyone has different experiences of every person they meet. Some people will come up to you and tell you about an experience that you've had with me, and it might be less favourable than somebody else. We all show people different sides of ourselves. It happens. And if he's calling these guys as his witnesses, they've had positive experiences with him. So why would they not say that? Why would this be dismissed? But the judge, like I said, accepted that these witnesses were telling the truth about their own experiences. But she said that their accounts cannot disprove the allegations of conduct in private or informal settings. In other words, you can be respectful to some and abusive to others. And that is right. Sometimes two things can be true. But you can't discredit one truth and accept another. Yeah. These character witnesses softened his public image but didn't help legally. The judge said their evidence carried a limited probative value. She was basically saying that the witnesses were saying that because they felt like they either owed him something, or potentially if there was any future work that he'd favour them, which is her assumption. That's not really fact, is it? The fact is what they've presented, that they've never had any issues. Yeah. And this is what we need to stick to, facts. So by this stage, Justice Dean had, she's formed a clear view, and this is between 425 and 430. She didn't see Clarke as a serial predator, but she did see a man who had blurred his professional lines, made unwanted advances, and used his status to behave inappropriately. That I do agree with. She wrote, the evidence demonstrates a pattern of conduct consistent across multiple witnesses and contexts. And about Clarke's personality, he was an articulate and intelligent witness who at times appeared more concerned with reputation than recollection. Now, of course, like I said, he's going to be concerned with his reputation because, as you can see now, it's completely ruined, isn't it? So he's going to be literally fighting for his life. However, he put himself into that position, and that is what we have to take into account. There's this accountability. You know, have you ever been in a situation where somebody does something to hurt you and you find out about it, you didn't know about it, and then you confront them, and then you get the apology. The apology isn't necessarily an apology for what they've done. It's an apology because they've been caught. And that's the difference. So the apology is not really genuine, is it? Because if it was genuine, would they even need to apologise? Because would they have done it in the first place? This is the argument. Everything is like you're crawling back, trying to grab onto anything now because you've put yourself into a situation you know you can't get out of, you know? And his wasn't necessarily to apologise, but it was to paint that what he did was in a professional capacity. This section of the judgment is effectively sealed his fate, even though not every allegation was proven in detail. The broader pattern met the threshold for substantial truth. If we step back, this part of the trial is interesting because it shows two competing realities. Yep. On one side, women who say Clarke's behaviour made them uncomfortable but felt powerless to speak up because of who he was. On the other side, a man who sees himself as a victim of cultural overcorrection, someone punished for being old school in a new world. The truth, according to the court, it's kind of like somewhere in the middle. He wasn't the monster that some had made him out to be, but he wasn't the misunderstood actor, producer, director he painted himself as. The judge therefore saw a man whose confidence crossed into entitlement and whose charm masked control. You know, I like to sum up the pros and the cons, as I do. Multiple credible witnesses, and this is the Guardian's advantage. Multiple credible witnesses showing consistent behavioural pattern. We've said this from the start. Clarke's contradictions and minimisation reinforce the defence of substantial truth. The character witnesses for Clarke, while positive, did not disprove the allegations. They didn't, because they're speaking of their experiences. But Clarke's advantage is no direct evidence of serious criminal conduct came forward in this section. Some allegations, like Louise Irwin, were explicitly dismissed. His character witness highlighted that not all professional interactions were appropriate. By the time the court had moved past 430, the paragraph that we conclude on, the picture's more or less complete. The Guardian's case wasn't built on one dramatic event. It was built on repetition, consistency and credibility. Clarke's defence rested on one word, banter, and that simply couldn't carry the weight of all of the evidence. In the next episode, we'll move into the final stage, the cross-examinations and the judgment itself, how the law decided what was true and what wasn't, and why Clarke ultimately lost his case. If you've got this far, I really appreciate you listening. If you've been following the series so far, thank you very much to you. I've had a couple of people that have come up to me and have said they really like this kind of edge that I'm doing here. It's something that I'm interested in. It's something that I understand quite well, and we're going to continue to do content on the Alternative Corner. In regards to Getz, I'm not doing anything until obviously he goes to court. The same with Michael Ward. The same with the injunction for Boxer versus Wishausen. All of those things I'll step into when there's evidence. I'm not going to be reporting on other people's reports. I want the evidence so we can look at it, we can break it down and we can analyse it ourselves. And you guys, as you know, you do get involved in the comments, which I really do appreciate. But for now, we're going to leave it as that. Like I said, if you've got this far, well done. I'm Abs of October Red. You have been listening to the Alternative Corner. We are proudly sponsored by SA UK, Maximum Security, Minimum Fuss, and as we say at October Red, stay ready.
Thank you for listening to the Alternative Corner. Most of our listeners have not yet subscribed. We kindly ask you for your support by subscribing to our channel and to share our content. October Red is sponsored by SA UK, Maximum Security, Minimum Fuss.